Thanks for tuning in to Vows Shattered. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Ethan sat at the cafe, watching the steam rise from his untouched coffee. He had always thought of himself as a man who valued honesty above all else. Yet here he was, replaying a conversation from the previous night that had shaken his trust. "You've got to believe me," Samantha had insisted, her eyes pleading but evasive. Logan just needed closure, that's all. "It's the last time." "I promise." Ethan wanted to believe her. After all, they had been together for 3 years, and despite their occasional disagreements, he thought their relationship was built on a solid foundation of trust and love. But the nagging doubts wouldn't go away. Logan, even his name, was enough to make Ethan's stomach tighten. Samantha's ex had always hovered around the edges of their life together. An occasional text, a casual mention in conversation, always dismissed as harmless. But Ethan had started to notice the patterns. Late-night phone calls, Samantha brushed off as work emergencies, messages quickly hidden when he entered the room. And now, this latest revelation. She had met with Logan despite swearing months ago that she was cutting all ties with him. The first cracks in Ethan's certainty began to appear weeks earlier. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, and Samantha had stepped out for what she called a quick errand. Hours passed before she returned, her explanation vague, and her mood defensive. Ethan had let it slide then, brushing off his unease as paranoia. Last night, however, was different. Ethan had come home early from work, exhausted but excited to surprise Samantha with dinner. Instead, he found her in the kitchen, phone clutched tightly in her hand, her expression unreadable. "Who was that?" he'd asked casually, setting the takeout bags on the counter. "No one," she replied too quickly. Ethan had learned to read Samantha's tells over the years, the small flickers in her eyes, and the slight tightening of her jaw when she wasn't being entirely truthful. "Come on, Sam," he'd pressed gently. "What's going on?" She had sighed then, the sound filled with a mix of frustration and resignation. It was Logan. He wanted to talk about things. He's struggling to move on. Ethan didn't respond immediately, his silence prompting Samantha to continue. "I went to meet him earlier," she admitted, her words tumbling out like a confession. "But it was just to give him closure. I needed to make it clear that he and I are over." The pang of betrayal Ethan felt wasn't just from the meeting itself, but from the realization that she had lied about it. What else had she been keeping from him? Now, sitting alone in the cafe, Ethan's thoughts churned. His instinct told him there was more to the story, and his mind refused to let it go. For the first time in their relationship, he began to question everything. The phone on the table buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. Samantha's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a simple message. "Can we talk tonight?" Ethan stared at the words, a storm brewing in his chest. Tonight, he thought, tonight, he would get the answers he needed, even if it meant facing a truth he wasn't ready to hear. Ethan stood by the window of his apartment, the city lights stretching out before him in endless pinpoints of gold and white. Samantha's message lingered in his mind. Can we talk tonight? Those 4 words had ignited a quiet storm in him. This time, he wouldn't settle for vague reassurances or promises that rang hollow. He needed answers, and he needed a plan. Pacing the room, Ethan's thoughts turned to the clues he'd tried to ignore. Her phone, always face down on the table, the guarded way she spoke about Logan, and, most damning of all, the way she reacted when Ethan simply asked for the truth. He wasn't the jealous type. He'd never pried into her personal space. But Samantha's recent behavior had pushed him to a breaking point, and most damning of all, the way she reacted pronounced the floor a relief from his own grieving process, the lost control, the hurry with which he guided Ethel through the rooms. He grabbed his laptop and began typing furiously. It wasn't anger driving him. It was clarity. Ethan was someone who thrived on structure and logic, qualities that made him an exceptional project manager. He approached this situation like he would any other problem, dissecting it piece by piece, mapping out a solution, and preparing contingencies. First, he opened a document and began to list everything he'd observed: unexplained absences, meeting Logan despite promises to end all contact, secretive texts and calls. Next, he mapped out what he wanted from their conversation tonight: clarity, honesty, and the reassurance that this pattern wouldn't continue. But as he stared at the screen, a deeper realization struck him. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to salvage what they had anymore. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Samantha. Ethan took a deep breath and opened it. She stood there, her coat draped over her arm, her expression a mixture of nervousness and resolve. She stepped inside, her perfume trailing faintly behind her. "Thanks for letting me come over," she said softly, taking a seat on the couch. Ethan stayed standing, his arms crossed. I wasn't sure if I should." Samantha winced, but nodded. "I know I've been unfair to you, Ethan. I want to explain." "Then explain," he said, his voice calm but firm. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I know meeting Logan was wrong. I just... He was going through something, and I thought I could help him. I didn't think it would help you." She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. She hesitated, her hand fidgeted with the strap of her purse. I thought, I thought I believe she was afraid. Yeah, if she could come here. That's the problem, Sam. You didn't think it would hurt me, Ethan said, leaning against the counter. You promised me months ago that you were done with him. Do you have any idea how it feels to find out that wasn't true? I do, she whispered, and I'm sorry. I never meant to lie to you. Ethan's silence filled the room like a heavy weight. He could feel the anger rising again, but he tamped it down. He wasn't here to yell or fight. He was here to understand. Did it stop there? He asked, his eyes piercing into hers. Just that meeting, or is there more you're not telling me? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. There's nothing else, I swear, Ethan. It was just that one meeting. Then show me your phone. The request hung in the air. Samantha froze, her eyes widening slightly. Ethan, that's... I mean, don't you trust me? She stammered. That's proof of the prayers and my good works. It, it's all I want to, he replied, his tone steady. But right now, trust isn't something I can just give. I need proof. She reached for her phone, but hesitated, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the lock screen. It felt like an eternity before she handed it to him. Ethan scrolled through her messages, his heart pounding with each swipe. For the most part, they were innocuous chats with coworkers, a group thread with her friends. But then he found the thread with Logan. His jaw clenched as he read. Tonight was amazing. I've missed this so much. Me too. I wish it didn't have to end. Ethan's hands shook as he set the phone down. Samantha was already in tears. It's not what it looks like, she pleaded. It's just words, Ethan. They didn't mean anything, but it meant something to me, he said, his voice breaking. You don't get to decide what hurts me, Samantha. The air between them was suffocating. Ethan took a step back, running his hands through his hair. I can't do this, he said, finally. I've given you everything, my trust, my love. And this is what you do with it? You lied to me. Again. Samantha reached out, her voice desperate. Ethan, please. No, he interrupted, shaking his head. This ends tonight. I'm done. Her sobs echoed as Ethan walked out of the room, leaving her to sit alone in the silence of what they had just destroyed. He didn't look back. He had no reason to, then sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. Samantha had left hours ago, her desperate pleas fading into the cold night. He hadn't answered her calls or texts since. There was nothing more to say on the other end of the call. For 3 years, Ethan had built a life around Samantha. Their shared memories, weekend getaways, and plans for the future had been woven into a tapestry that now lay in shreds. The discovery of her betrayal had left him gutted, but as the hours passed, a new feeling emerged, a quiet, simmering resolve. He had made his decision. He was leaving her. It wasn't enough to simply break up with Samantha. Ethan wanted a clean slate, free of her lies and manipulations. But leaving wouldn't be easy. They shared a lease on their apartment, mutual friends, and even a joint bank account they had opened just a few months ago. Untangling his life from hers would require precision and foresight, qualities he had honed in his career. He grabbed a notepad from his desk drawer and began sketching out his plan. Step 1. Financial freedom. The first item on his list was the joint account. Ethan logged into their banking app, taking note of the balance. Samantha hadn't withdrawn any money recently, but he wasn't about to take any chances. He transferred his portion of the funds into his personal savings account and made a mental note to visit the bank first thing in the morning to close the joint account entirely. Ethan also reviewed their shared credit card. Samantha had pushed for it, saying it would simplify their expenses, but now it felt like a ticking time bomb. He called the credit card company requesting a freeze on the account. "Is there an issue with the card, sir?" the representative asked. "No," Ethan replied, his voice calm, "just taking precautions." He knew Samantha would notice these moves eventually, but by the time she did, it wouldn't matter. Step 2. The apartment. Ethan turned his attention to their shared apartment. He had been the one to sign the lease, and Samantha's name wasn't on it. That gave him leverage. He searched through his files until he found the rental agreement and the landlord's contact information. The landlord, Mrs. Cooper, was a retired teacher who has always been friendly to Ethan. He dialed her number, rehearsing what he would say. "Mrs. Cooper, it's Ethan from 4B, he began when she answered. "I need to discuss a change in my living arrangements." After a few minutes of polite conversation, Mrs. Cooper agreed to terminate the lease early, provided Ethan moved out within 2 weeks. He thanked her and hung up, feeling a sense of relief. The apartment had been their home, but now it felt like a prison of broken promises. He closed his eyes, remembering his vision, straining to reach the rails, but something pinned them to the floor. Step 3. The exit. Ethan knew that leaving quietly was his best option. Samantha wasn't the kind to take rejection lightly, and he didn't want a drawn-out confrontation. He decided to pack his things while she was at work the next day. He spent the rest of the night sorting through his belongings, setting aside what he would take and what he would leave behind. The books they had bought together, the framed photos on the shelves, he didn't want any of it. Those items belonged to a version of their life that no longer existed. Instead, he focused on the essentials: his laptop, clothes, important documents, and a few sentimental items from his family. He found an old shoebox filled with letters and photos from his parents and tucked it into his suitcase. Step 4. The final goodbye. Ethan didn't want to leave without saying something. He wasn't the kind of person to disappear without explanation, no matter how much Samantha deserved it. But his goodbye wouldn't be a conversation. He sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and a sheet of paper, the words coming slowly at first. Samantha, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. You've made your choices, and I've made mine. I trusted you, and you broke that trust. I can't keep pretending things will get better when you've shown me time and again that they won't. He folded the letter neatly and left it on the dining table, weighted down by the house key. Step 5. A fresh start. The following morning, Ethan loaded his car with his packed bags. It was a gray, overcast day, the kind that matched his mood perfectly. As he pulled out of the driveway for the last time, he felt a mixture of sadness and liberation. He had booked a room at a small inn a few towns over, a temporary refuge while he figured out his next steps. For the first time in years, he was free. No more lies. No more betrayals. Ethan's phone buzzed as he reached the highway. Samantha's name flashed on the screen. He ignored it and switched his phone to silent. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could finally put himself first. Samantha stood frozen in the doorway of the apartment, her gaze fixed on the emptiness that greeted her. The sofa, the bookshelves, the small collection of Ethan's favorite vinyl records, all gone. Only the faint echo of her footsteps filled the space, the silence punctuated by the ticking of the kitchen clock. Her eyes fell on the note sitting on the dining table, pinned beneath the weight of Ethan's house key. With trembling hands, she picked it up and unfolded the paper. The sharp, precise handwriting she knew so well delivered a finality she hadn't expected. Samantha, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The rest of the words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She sank into one of the dining chairs, clutching the note as if it could undo the reality before her. Ethan was gone. He hadn't just left the apartment. He had left her. Samantha's thoughts raced, searching for answers. She had begged him to talk, to listen, to let her explain. She'd promised it was just one meeting with Logan, that it didn't mean anything. But Ethan had been cold, distant, and unreachable, his silence more damning than any argument. The first waves of guilt. As she sat in the empty apartment, the weight of her actions began to sink in. She had told herself for months that her connection with Logan was harmless, a relic of a past she couldn't quite let go of. But Ethan had seen it differently. To him, it was a betrayal of trust, and now she was forced to confront the truth. She had chosen to jeopardize everything for someone who no longer mattered. She replayed their last conversation, Ethan's voice calm but filled with quiet devastation. "You promised me," he had said, his words like a knife. "You swore you were done with him. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" She hadn't had an answer then, and she didn't have one now. Desperate measures. Samantha grabbed her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Ethan's name. Her thumb hovered over the call button before she pressed it. The line rang, each tone stretching into an eternity. "Hi, this is Ethan. Leave a message." The sound of his voicemail was a fresh blow. She left a hurried message, her voice cracking. "Ethan, please, we need to talk. I can't believe you just left like this. I made a mistake, but you have to give me a chance to fix it. Please call me back." She tried again an hour later, and then again before she went to bed. Each unanswered call felt like a door slamming shut. Reaching out to Logan. By the next morning, Samantha was spiraling. She couldn't stay in the apartment. It felt like a mausoleum of memories she couldn't bear to face. She reached for her phone again, but this time she called Logan. "Sam?" Logan's voice was groggy, as if he had just woken up. "Ethan's gone," she blurted, pacing the living room. He found out about us." Logan sighed. "Sam, we talked about this. You said you were going to handle things." "Handle things?" She snapped, her frustration boiling over. "He left me, Logan. He took everything and walked out without a second thought. What am I supposed to do now?" "I don't know, Sam. Maybe this is for the best," Logan said, his tone indifferent. "If it wasn't working between you two—" "It was working," she interrupted, tears spilling over. "It was everything I wanted. And I threw it away for you. Don't you dare act like you didn't have a part in this." Logan was silent for a moment before responding, his voice cool. Look, I didn't ask you to meet me. That was your decision. You're the one who couldn't let go." Samantha ended the call, her hands shaking with anger. Logan's indifference only magnified her despair. He had been the spark for her mistakes, but now he was nowhere to be found. A lonely reckoning. The next few days passed in a haze. Samantha went through the motions of her routine, showering, eating, working, but nothing felt real. Every corner of the apartment reminded her of Ethan. The coffee mugs he always insisted on washing by hand, the throw blanket he kept on the couch for movie nights. Even the faint scent of his cologne lingered in the bedroom, a cruel reminder of what she'd lost. She began reaching out to their mutual friends, fishing for information. "Have you heard from Ethan?" she asked Claire, one of Ethan's closest friends. "No," Claire replied curtly, and honestly, "Samantha, I don't think he wants to be found. You really screwed up this time." Samantha hung up, feeling more isolated than ever. A harsh reality. The breaking point came when Samantha opened their joint bank account online, only to find it nearly empty. She stared at the balance in disbelief, her heart sinking. Ethan had taken his share and left her with just enough to cover the rent. She knew then that he had thought this through. This wasn't a rash decision born of anger. He had planned his escape, cutting her out of his life with surgical precision. Samantha collapsed onto the couch, clutching her phone. She had hoped that Ethan's departure was temporary, a way to cool off before they worked things out. But now it was clear he was gone for good. As the days turned to weeks, Samantha began to understand the depth of her loss. Ethan had been her anchor, her stability, and her future, and she had let it all slip through her fingers. All that remained now was silence, a stark, unyielding reminder of her mistakes. The sunrise bathed the quiet town in hues of gold and orange as Ethan pulled into the driveway of his rented cottage. The house was modest, tucked away on the outskirts of a small lakeside community, its wooden exterior weathered but charming. A single rocking chair swayed gently on the front porch, creaking with the morning breeze. It had been a week since he'd left the apartment and Samantha behind, though to Ethan it felt like a lifetime. The rush of emotions, anger, betrayal, grief, had dulled somehow, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. This place, far removed from the chaos of his old life, offered something he hadn't felt in years, since his old life offered something he hadn't found in years. Peace, filled by knowledge, companionship, and search for answers. This place, far away from the chaos. Settling in, Ethan spent his first day unpacking, taking time to place his belongings carefully. Each item felt symbolic, a piece of his past now redefined in his present. The shoebox, filled with letters and photos from his family, took its place on a shelf near the window. His laptop, a lifeline for work and distraction, found a home on the modest desk in the corner. The act of arranging these items was therapeutic. It allowed Ethan to take stock of what truly mattered to him, what was worth keeping, and what he could let go of. As he hung his clothes in the narrow closet, he noticed the absence of Samantha's influence. There were no floral prints, no neatly folded scarves or dresses, just him and his essentials. The quiet of the cottage was profound. For the first time in years, there were no hurried footsteps or muffled conversations in the background. It was just the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. Ethan welcomed the solitude, reflecting on the past. In the evening, Ethan sat by the small fireplace, the flames crackling softly as he sipped a cup of tea. He found himself reflecting on the chain of events that had led him here. Samantha's betrayal had been devastating, not just because of her actions, but because of the life they had built together. Ethan had poured his heart into their relationship, trusting her implicitly, only to realize she didn't value their bond as he did. But as painful as it was, Ethan now saw her betrayal as a turning point. He had spent so much time compromising and giving without question, that he had lost sight of his own needs. Samantha's actions had forced him to confront the truth. Their relationship had been unbalanced for a long time. This wasn't just an escape from Samantha. It was an opportunity to rediscover himself. Building a routine, Ethan quickly settled into a routine. Mornings began with a run along the lake, the cool air clearing his mind and energizing his body. He'd then spend a few hours working remotely, his focus sharper now that distractions were gone. Afternoons were reserved for exploring the town, the small grocery store, the local cafe, and the independent bookstore quickly became familiar haunts. He struck up conversations with locals, brief, friendly exchanges that reminded him of the simple joys of connection without obligation. One afternoon, as he browsed the shelves of the bookstore, an older gentleman named Walter struck up a conversation. "New in town?" Walter asked, his voice warm and inviting. "Yeah," Ethan replied, with a small smile. "Needed a change of scenery." "Well, you've picked a good spot for that. This place has a way of helping people figure things out," Walter said, patting Ethan on the shoulder, reconnecting with himself. In the evenings, Ethan took long walks along the lake shore, the water shimmering under the moonlight. These moments of solitude became his sanctuary, a space where he could process everything at his own pace. He began journaling again, something he hadn't done in years. Each entry was a blend of reflection and aspiration, acknowledging the pain of his past while setting goals for the future. One evening, he wrote, "I don't know what's next, but I know I want to build something real, something that can't be broken by lies or deceit. Maybe it starts with me figuring out who I am without the weight of someone else's expectations." A sense of closure. Ethan wasn't naive. He knew the scars of Samantha's betrayal wouldn't vanish overnight. There would be moments when memories of her would surface, uninvited and bittersweet. But those memories no longer felt like shackles. They were lessons, painful, yes, but valuable. He thought of Samantha, wondering if she felt any remorse, if she regretted what she'd done. But the thought didn't linger. He had no control over her feelings or actions, only his own. The cottage, the lake, the town, they were the foundation of his new beginning. It wasn't about running away, it was about running towards something better. Hope for the future. One morning, as the sun rose over the lake, Ethan sat on the porch with his coffee. A small smile played on his lips as he watched the world wake up around him. For the first time in a long while, the future felt open, full of possibilities he hadn't dared to consider before. He didn't have all the answers, but he had something even more important, the freedom to find them.